Hi guys, welcome back. Today we've got, this is Snowdrop. I produced Snowdrop a few years ago. She's stunning. She's got some lovely colours going on. It's a bit washed out by the light, but that's because she just produces, or is, this stunning sort of really weird white. Anyway, today's video we're going to talk about why this is the way it is, what makes up the colour, the pattern, the base colour, and those sorts of things, and how they play into each other. So yeah, we're going to talk about gargoyle geckos' colours and pattern variations. And wow, I can't explain what this one is right now. But yeah, let's get into it. So before we dig in, two geckos. This one is reticulated. This one is a striped, or is it? And if that last one was a stripe, well then, what's this one? Commonly referred to as a skeleton. Dude, definitely. What about this dude? Is this reticulated? Very busy pattern. The others are striped or reticulated. What does that make this dude? You see, there's lots of variation, but there's only actually two types. There's only a striped and reticulated. So that's what we want to get into. So let's have a dig into that right now. Okay, so on the whiteboard then, I've just drawn out a few little diagrams to help explain how gargoyle gecko's pattern and colour works. I'll bring your attention to these three layers here. Okay, and these three layers represent the layers that the pattern and colour work, and each layer is explained here. Just, it's easier to explain it in the reverse order, i.e. the base pattern and then colour pattern or pattern colour, but the layers work differently. So the top layer, if you like, the one that you see the most, is the pattern colour, and then below that then you'll have the pattern, and then below that you'll have the base colour. So just to sort of explain that, the whiteboard and the diagram as it is, and then from there then the first layer we want to look at is the base colour. Base colour is under the colour that you see underneath, and this is generally the belly colour. So if you turn the geckos over, you can see that they have a white belly or a yellow belly or a red belly, and that will help identify what base pattern or base colour they have. And I showed this on the yellow stripe versus yellow base video I recently did, where I turned the geckos over and you could see one had the white belly, one had the yellow belly. Now, in terms of base colour, generally it's white, yellow or red. Orange is too hard to sort of pinpoint, although you probably do get an orange base. And then it can go darker and almost into a brown, but as we'll talk about in a bit, that could be more the layering system of colours that sort of hinders that than actual base colours that are available. And then the next layer is pattern. So in gargoyle geckos, there's only two patterns, okay? You've either got striped or reticulated. They're the only two patterns that are there. Anything else, and we'll talk about some more in a bit, are variations of this. They're not different, they're not a third, it's just variations of this. There are only two types of pattern, and that is striped or reticulated. Now, the third layer, which is the most interesting layer, is the pattern colour. Now, pattern colour is almost always influenced by pattern. And by this, I mean, if you have a red striped gecko, it's generally a red stripe pattern colour on a striped animal pattern. And the same for blotched. If you have a red blotched animal, a red blotched pattern colour, it's normally on a reticulated pattern gecko. Very rarely do you get a striped animal with blotch or a reticulated animal with striped colour. Now that's not to say they don't exist, but it's just very rare that you get that. So I think that the pattern influences the pattern colour, and that is why we end up with that scenario. And that's your third layer. Now, it's not always as clear cut as this. You can get striped animals that then have striped pattern, but then they also have blotching. Or you can have reticulated animals that have blotching, but also can have a variation of a stripe, and that can be colour, mainly colour, that you can see running through the animal if you look at it in a certain direction. Now, extreme examples of this are skeletons. So down here I've got a diagram of a skeleton. Now I think, and I know other people think this too, but I think a skeleton is a pattern colour anomaly where it displays both stripe and blotch. And then what happens is it blotches out into the stripe and you end up with this skeleton style pattern. Pattern colour. Now the same thing can happen with the pattern, right? So you can get anomalies where you end up with a stripe and a reticulated. And this is generally referred to as a mosaic. Now, you get varying degrees of mosaic. The one I've drawn here is mainly reticulated with a thin stripe running through. And sometimes that reticulation can just form up into like waves, if you like, into a striped or a semi-striped pattern on the back. Sometimes it can be more a striped animal that has varying degrees of reticulation showing, or the stripes along the flanks are slightly broken up and form like very, very faint reticulations. And that, I believe, is an anomaly where you get one animal that shows both pattern variations, which may also lead into the same thing happening through the pattern colour, which is why you may get some degree of skeleton in a mosaic. And then the last pattern anomaly is banded. Now, personally, I think banded are just reticulated, where the reticulations are just gravitated towards each other and form these bands. I have yet to prove whether this is genetic or genetic in terms of, is there something at play that forms banded, or is it just line breeding that creates that? So the little banded one that I showed before, that was almost pure white with the 3 bands, does come from a banded animal, female, but a striped male. Now, is that banding from the mum, or is it just the influence of her bloodlines on that? I don't know. This is something that a lot of people are still working out, and it's very difficult sometimes to work out a genetic trait or a stacked trait through selective breeding. Now, again, the skeleton can have the same effect. So you can get a skeleton from 2 striped animals. You can get a skeleton from a retic to a stripe, or 2 reticulated geckos, and then you can still produce a skeleton. So is it a genetic anomaly? Is it a anomaly, or is it just a misfire during incubation that creates an animal that has both sets of pattern colour coming through? Time will tell, I would guess on that one. Now the problem arises is when we start breeding the more solid coloured animals that we get through now, where they are super blotches, where the blotches have all been joined together, or they're super stripes on a red base. So say for example, red base, red striped animal, and then you've got maybe some skeleton at play with a small amount of blotching in the side, which would give you total coverage, which is fantastic. But then we fall into the lines of, what's this? What is this? You know, what pattern is it? Is it a striped animal? Is it a reticulated animal? Is it a patterned striped? Sorry, pattern coloured striped, pattern coloured blotch, and all these things then start getting a bit murky, because now you've just got a solid red gecko. So it's worth just understanding what that looks like, and sometimes you can tell through when they're fired up or fired down. But I've got a couple here that, to be honest, you can't even tell when they're fired up or fired down what they are. Their colour's very bright and their pattern is very reduced. And the only other thing to touch on here is the stacking effect of colour theory. And I say theory because I don't think we have categorically proven this as a as a thing, because you can get certain colour variations or variations of colour out of pairings without them necessarily displaying those colours. But the theory is that white stacked turns into yellow, yellow stacked turns into orange, orange stacked turns into red, red stacked turns into brown. Is that true? Does it actually work that way? I don't know. I'm not been in the game long enough to say yes or no. Some people say yes. I don't disagree, but I don't necessarily agree with this in terms of, if you stack enough yellows together, you're going to get reds eventually. Like, how many generations does it take for that to happen would be my question. Come back on that one. And then, why we have striped and retics? Are they morphs? I don't think so. Both came out the wild. I would say that probably isolated geological groups of gargoyle geckos found that being reticulated was more beneficial to them, and being striped was more beneficial in another area, and that's why you get the diversity of, you could get both out of both. I've had striped and reticulated come out of both breedings, stripe to stripe, reticulated to reticulated, and I've produced stripes and reticulated. It can be again on their genetic or their lineage and how stacked that gene is. And I would say that if it's if you've got a reticulated stacked lineage, you're likely to get more retics than stripes, and if you've got striped lineage, you're likely to get more stripes than reticulated, depending on how that works. Now, I have a theory that they get most of their colour and pattern from mum, and at the moment I would say 1 in 4 gets their diversity from their father's line, but I've got very little evidence to back that up in terms of long-term breeding. So that is just a working theory on my part, that mum is the main influencer into babies, and that's sort of where my coral project is, and why I'm working on that is to sort of have a look at that. But that is gargoyle geckos colour pattern variations in a nutshell. There is plenty of information on this online if you dig into Gargoyle Gecko Queen and a few websites like that, and there's quite a few good podcasts to check out to sort of that verbally explain this, but I just wanted to draw it out on the whiteboard so that you can actually see it. So I guess the final question is this: what's your favourite? Is it the stripes, reticulated, Is it the stripe colour pattern or the blotch colour pattern? Interested to hear what you think in the comments. So thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like and subscribe and do all the usual stuff. If you want to see more of my geckos, then have a look on our Instagram. Apart from that, thanks for checking us out. Cheers. Bye.